Hello and welcome to this video showing you how I created my mixed media piece on a cityscape of New York, sunset, with all the lights shining and reflecting in the river below. Just a couple of images to give you some close-ups. I started with a canvas panel and found a load of business cards that we didn't need anymore, and at this point I had absolutely no idea what my picture was going to turn into. So I was just arranging them and gluing them down using PVA, overlapping them onto my canvas panel to create a nice textured finish. I was planning on trimming them down to the same size as the canvas panel originally, but then that's why I didn't cover the outsides with gesso. But then I changed my mind and I decided quite like the unevenness of the edges, so I added some more business cards around the outside. So I had the same pattern going around the edge and gessoed them down. Some of them were a bit tricky to get stuck down because there's quite a few gaps underneath, so I had to build up some glue and gesso underneath to get them to stick. And 2 or 3 coats of gesso and some white acrylic paint to hide the pattern on the business cards. And then I had a surface and still didn't know what I was going to do with it at this point, I must admit. Gluing down a sheet of tissue paper to give me a surface that I can work on, to paint on. I had to piece in some tissue there because my tissue just wasn't big enough to cover the whole section, and just taking off the excess, neatening up the edges a little bit. In the end I left quite a lot of it and neatened it all up at the end. Then I added another layer of tissue just to make sure that I had a surface that wasn't going to give way on me when I started to paint on it. So here I'm adding a nice crumpled up piece of tissue to give extra texture to my finished painting. Now I was looking at my pattern I've created there with my business cards and thinking, well, it looks like it's the buildings are overlapping one behind the other, and cityscape came to mind, so I thought, we've been to New York, I've got some pictures of New York, I'll do a New York cityscape. I'm doing there with my ruler, I'm creating my horizon line, so I didn't want my buildings flowing downhill. So I measured it off and used my ruler. I'm keeping my ruler in place while I'm doing my sky. Just blobbing down the colours here for my sky. The yellows of the reflected lights into the sky from the buildings, the pink from the sunset, and then the dark blue into the sky. And I'm not being too fussy about getting those reflections 100% accurate from the skyline. I'm just blocking in rough shapes where the buildings are going to go in the end. Once that top half's dry, I'm just blocking in some underneath now using the same colours. I've got some purple, cadmium red, cadmium yellows, ultramarine blue going on in there, and some white, and I think some lemon yellow as well put in there just to add a little bit of extra light into it. So I'm just building up my colours, getting my reflections, dabbing the paint in horizontally into the water to get the effect of the reflections building up there. Now I'm blocking in my buildings. I've not drawn them, I'm just copying a photograph here, so very freehand, very loose. I'm not doing a very ultra detailed picture because I can't, because the surface is so uneven that I'm working on here. It would be very, very difficult. Pencil blocking in there where the bridge goes and the bridge support. Just using plain black here to get the outline of my buildings in, and the major structures, so I know what's going where. I have simplified down New York enormously. There are far more buildings than this in reality, but there's no way I could paint them on this size canvas, on this surface. I've taken out all the cranes as well. New York is a city that never sleeps and is always being rebuilt, and there should be a lot of cranes going on there, but there are not. But I have tried, I'm using the photograph reference, I've tried to get the main buildings in that you can see on the cityscape, the skyline, putting in the orange there for the reflected light coming through from all the windows. Just putting in the buildings in the background, and the photograph weren't particularly lit up, so I'm keeping those very dark, and it adds as a nice contrast to the sky. Just neatening up the edges there so I can see where the edges of my buildings are. Keep turning my picture around because it's easier to work sometimes upside down than the right way up. So that's the rough outline of all my buildings. Now I'm neatening up those edges, so I'm gluing down my tissue on the back of those business cards to make sure that I've got a nice sturdy finish and that nothing's going to come adrift. And once all that's dry, going in with some primary blue with a bit of grey added to it to create that nice blue effect. And that blue's catching the light of the rooftops of the low buildings in the foreground and the taller buildings behind, and it gives the effect of the cars moving along the roads that are there as well, along the river frontage. Building up my buildings, adding in the vertical columns for those skyscrapers, and trying to give the effect of layers of traffic moving as well through the city. Just putting in the highlights where the light would catch on those buildings. Okay. Leaving it to dry, having a little look at it, see what needs doing next. Now it's time to start adding in the thousands of little dots for the lights on the buildings and on the bridge. It has got lights strung on cables. So I'm using a very small brush. It's a very old battered brush I've got there. Most of the bristles have fallen out of it. For doing very fine dots it's perfect. And I'm going in with a mixture of lemon yellow and white and some orange on the back, the windows further behind as well, just to create some effect of distance. I'm trying to get some idea of perspective. So the buildings facing me, I've got the horizontal lights, and as the ones going away I try to angle the windows to give the idea of the 3D perspective. Just gradually building up and trying to get it more lifelike. I'm building into those reflections. Decided it was a bit too pink at this point. It was just a little bit overpowering, the pinkness of it all. So I've gone in with an ultramarine wash, and then I've added in some grey into it as well to darken down the night sky and the sea as well, the river. So it's always using the same colours in the reflections. When I'm adding it into the reflections, I'm working horizontally. Now I'm using lemon yellow with white, just to give some speckles and unevenness on the water surface to show that it is flowing, that water. Building up those lights, possibly because it was on tissue paper, the paint was sinking in a little bit and I was losing some of the definition, so I went in a couple of times on those lights to get them to show up. And we're just building those lights all the time. There we go, just keep adding colour, adding shadows, adding contrast colours. Okay. Building those, the lights on the bridge as well, because they're quite bright, but I didn't want them to actually overpower the painting in the end. So I toned them down a little bit. Got a layer of shorter buildings in the foreground and then the tall skyscrapers behind, just indicating them really with the roof line. Putting the columns on those buildings on the right hand side to try and balance out the painting, because there's a lot of detail on the left and I felt it just needed that little bit of something on the right to balance it out. Now then, I didn't like the way those windows were working on that building. In real life it is like that V shape, you can see me painting in there, and I felt I'd lost that a little bit, so I blocked it all out and redid them again. Again, just going in now, neatening it all up, and that's my cityscape of New York, painted on tissue paper and business cards. a little bit of inspiration there from some business cards. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope to see you again soon. If you like the video, then please subscribe so you don't miss out on the next ones. Thank you. Bye now.